Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. Willow fainted in court, and Port Charles was left reeling as one of the most explosive courtroom moments in General Hospital history unfolded before stunned onlookers, because what began as a tense but routine hearing spiraled into chaos when Danny Morgan made a surprise appearance that no one, not Willow, not Michael, not the judge, and certainly not the gallery packed with enemies and allies, could have anticipated. And the shocking secret he revealed would alter the course of Willow's life forever. The courtroom was already thick with tension as Willow stood at the defense table, pale but composed, her hands trembling just slightly as she listened to testimony that had been circling dangerously close to truths she had buried deep, and even Michael, seated just feet away, could sense something was about to break because Willow's eyes kept darting toward the door as if fate itself were stalking her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The judge called for order, the prosecutor pressed forward with accusations that painted Willow as a woman with motives far darker than anyone had ever suspected, and just as the pressure reached its peak, the heavy courtroom doors creaked open with a sound so sharp it sliced through the murmurs like a knife, drawing every gaze in the room toward the unexpected figure standing there, Danny Morgan. Gasps rippled through the courtroom instantly, because Danny wasn't on any witness list, hadn't been subpoenaed, and wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this trial, yet there he stood, older than many remembered, eyes burning with a mixture of fear, determination, and something else entirely, truth. Jason's son took a step forward, ignoring the bailiff's attempt to stop him, and in that moment the energy in the room shifted completely, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen, and Willow's breath caught in her throat because the instant she saw Danny, her face drained of all color, as though she already knew exactly what was coming. The judge demanded to know who Danny was and why he was interrupting proceedings, but before anyone could escort him out, Danny spoke up with a voice that was steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath it, declaring that he had information directly related to the case, information that proved Willow was not who everyone believed her to be. The prosecutor objected loudly, Michael stood up in shock, Carly's heart nearly stopped, and Nina's eyes narrowed with sudden dread, because Danny's words landed like a ticking bomb, and no one could stop the countdown. When the judge reluctantly allowed Danny to speak after a heated sidebar, Danny walked to the witness stand, his footsteps echoing like thunder, and as he raised his hand to swear an oath, Willow's knees visibly buckled, though she forced herself to remain upright, clinging to the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Danny began slowly, explaining that he had overheard conversations years ago, fragments at first, whispers between adults who assumed he was too young to understand, and those whispers had followed him ever since, haunting him, until recent events forced him to connect the dots, and when he finally did, the truth became impossible to ignore. The courtroom was silent, every breath held, as Danny revealed that on the night connected to the crime Willow was being accused of, she had not been acting of her own free will, because someone else had orchestrated everything from the shadows, manipulating her, threatening her, and using a secret so devastating that Willow believed compliance was the only way to protect the people she loved. At that moment, Willow let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, tears flooding her eyes as her worst fear began to materialize in public, because Danny wasn't just telling the truth, he was exposing the secret she had sacrificed everything to keep buried. Danny then dropped the bombshell that shattered the courtroom completely. Willow had been protecting a child, and not just any child, but one whose paternity had been deliberately hidden, twisted by lies and power plays, and that child's existence was the leverage used to control her actions. Whispers erupted across the gallery as Michael stared at Willow in disbelief, realization dawning too late, while Nina clutched the edge of her seat, her face contorting with a mix of horror and guilt, because she suddenly understood how much of Willow's suffering had been fueled by silence and fear. As Danny continued, his voice cracking now, he revealed that the child was tied to a past incident involving Jason Morgan, a secret arrangement made to keep the child safe from dangerous enemies, and that Willow had been forced into silence under the threat that if she spoke out, the truth would destroy lives and put that child in mortal danger. The weight of those words was unbearable, and as Danny spoke the final sentence, naming the person who had enforced the threats and pulled the strings from behind the scenes, Willow's world collapsed completely, because the name he spoke was someone she trusted, someone she believed had been protecting her all along. The room spun, her vision blurred, and before anyone could reach her, Willow collapsed to the floor in a heap, unconscious, her body finally giving in to the strain she had carried alone for far too long. Chaos erupted instantly as Michael rushed to her side, calling her name in panic, Carly shouting for a medic, Nina frozen in shock, and the judge pounding the gavel helplessly as order dissolved into pandemonium. Paramedics were called, the court recessed abruptly, and as Willow was lifted onto a stretcher, her face ghostly pale, the reality of Danny's revelation settled in like a nuclear fallout, because nothing in Port Charles would ever be the same again. In the aftermath, Danny stood alone near the witness stand, tears streaming silently down his face, knowing that telling the truth had cost him something too, but also knowing that Willow deserved freedom from the lies that had nearly destroyed her. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, headlines already writing themselves as whispers of hidden children, blackmail, and betrayal spread like wildfire through the city, while inside, Michael vowed through clenched teeth to uncover every last person responsible for manipulating Willow, and Nina, shaken to her core, was forced to confront the painful truth that her own choices may have helped trap Willow in a nightmare she never deserved. As Willow was rushed to the hospital, hovering between consciousness and collapse, her fate, and the fate of everyone connected to her, hung in the balance, because Danny's shocking secret didn't just explain the past, it cracked open a future filled with reckoning, redemption, and consequences no one could escape. And as the courtroom lights dimmed and the doors finally closed on that unforgettable day, one truth echoed louder than all the rest: Willow had fainted in court not because she was guilty, but because the truth, once spoken aloud, was powerful enough to shatter even the strongest heart, and in Port Charles, the fallout from Danny's surprise appearance had only just begun. The moment Willow was rushed out of the courthouse on a stretcher, the shockwaves from her collapse rippled outward with devastating force, because Port Charles is a town that feeds on secrets, and Danny Morgan had just cracked one wide open in the most public way imaginable, leaving no one untouched by the truth he unleashed. And as the ambulance doors slammed shut and sirens wailed into the distance, Michael stood frozen on the courthouse steps, his chest heaving, his mind racing backward. Through years of memories that suddenly felt tainted, altered, incomplete, because every quiet moment with Willow now carried a haunting question he couldn't ignore: what else had she been forced to hide, and who had done this to her? Inside General Hospital, the ER exploded into controlled chaos as doctors rushed Willow into trauma, monitors beeping frantically while nurses barked orders, and as her body lay still beneath harsh fluorescent lights, it became painfully clear that her fainting wasn't just physical exhaustion but the catastrophic release of emotional pressure built up over years of silence, fear, and manipulation. Michael paced the hallway like a caged animal, his fists clenched, replaying Danny's testimony over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last, while Carly stood nearby, torn between fury and heartbreak, because she recognized that look in Michael's eyes, the look of a man realizing too late that the woman he loved had been fighting a war he never saw. Nina arrived moments later, breathless and pale, her confidence shattered, and the instant she saw Willow through the glass, unconscious and vulnerable, guilt slammed into her with suffocating force, because the dots were connecting in her mind now, and she could no longer deny that her own choices, her silence, and her hunger for control had contributed to the nightmare Willow had endured. When the doctor finally emerged and confirmed Willow was stable but emotionally fragile, warning that further stress could be dangerous, Michael's relief was immediate yet hollow, because survival wasn't the same as healing, and Willow's soul had been fractured in ways medicine couldn't fix. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, the trial had officially imploded, but the damage was far from contained, because Danny's revelation ignited a firestorm among the city's most powerful players, and Jason's name, spoken aloud in connection with a hidden child, sent chills through every corner of Port Charles. Jason himself learned of Danny's testimony in stunned silence, his jaw tightening as he processed the possibility that his past decisions, made in the name of protection, had resulted in unimaginable suffering for someone he never intended to hurt, and the realization that his son had stepped forward to expose the truth filled him with both pride and crushing fear, because once secrets like that surface, they don't just free the innocent, they provoke the guilty. At the hospital, Danny arrived quietly, standing in the hallway outside Willow's room, his hands shaking as he stared at the door, unsure whether he had done the right thing, because even though he had spoken the truth, the weight of what he had revealed pressed heavily on his young shoulders, and when Michael finally approached him, the silence between them was thick with unspoken emotion until Michael pulled Danny into a fierce embrace, thanking him through clenched teeth, because without Danny's courage, Willow might have been destroyed completely. That moment was interrupted when Nina, unable to stay silent any longer, stepped forward and demanded to know exactly how much Danny knew, her voice trembling not with anger but terror, because deep down she sensed that the secret she had helped bury was clawing its way back to the surface, and when Danny met her gaze with quiet resolve, it was clear he wasn't afraid anymore. As night fell over Port Charles, Willow finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering open slowly, confusion washing over her face until memory crashed back in like a tidal wave, and the moment she remembered the courtroom, Danny, and the secret spoken aloud, tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered Michael's name, her voice breaking under the weight of shame and relief colliding inside her. Michael rushed to her side, taking her hand gently, promising she was safe, but Willow shook her head weakly, because safety was a luxury she hadn't known in years, and now that the truth was out, the danger she had feared might only be beginning. With trembling honesty, Willow began to speak, finally unburdening herself of the full story she had never dared to tell, revealing how years ago she had been cornered by a powerful figure who knew the truth about the child's paternity and used it as leverage, threatening exposure, violence, and destruction if Willow ever stepped out of line, forcing her into a web of lies so tight she couldn't breathe, let alone escape. Michael listened in stunned silence, his heart shattering with every word, because the woman he thought he knew had been sacrificing herself over and over again to protect an innocent life, and the rage that ignited inside him was unlike anything he had ever felt, directed not at Willow, but at every person who had manipulated her fear for their own gain. Across town, rumors spread like wildfire, alliances shifted, and old enemies sensed opportunity, because when a secret child is involved in Port Charles, nothing stays buried for long, and by morning, whispers of revenge, exposure, and retaliation were already circulating. Jason confronted Danny privately, grappling with the guilt of knowing his past choices had set this chain of events in motion, and when Danny admitted he had been scared but couldn't watch Willow be destroyed anymore, Jason realized that his son had become braver than he ever imagined, and that protecting the truth now mattered more than protecting the lie. At the same time, Nina faced her own reckoning, haunted by the image of Willow collapsing in court, forced to confront the possibility that her obsession with control and family had blinded her to Willow's pain, and when she attempted to visit Willow only to be turned away by Michael, the rejection cut deeply, because for the first time, Nina understood that forgiveness wasn't something she could demand, it had to be earned, and she might never get it. As dawn broke, detectives reopened the case with fresh eyes, realizing that the evidence against Willow no longer held, and the prosecutor quietly prepared for damage control, because Danny's testimony had blown a hole through the narrative they had built, exposing corruption, coercion, and manipulation that reached far beyond one woman's alleged crime. Willow, weak but resolute, made a decision from her hospital bed that would change everything. She would no longer run, hide, or protect those who had threatened her, even if it meant exposing every dark secret tied to that child, because silence had nearly killed her, and she refused to let fear control her life any longer. Michael vowed to stand by her no matter the cost, even as he understood that the truth they were about to unleash could destroy powerful people and put them all in danger, but love, once tested by fire, had hardened into something unbreakable. As the sun rose over Port Charles, casting long shadows across the hospital windows, one thing became terrifyingly clear: Willow's fainting spell in court was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of a reckoning that would expose hidden bloodlines, shatter reputations, and force every person involved to answer for the choices they made, because in Port Charles, secrets don't die quietly, they explode, and Danny Morgan's shocking courtroom revelation had lit the fuse. As the days following Willow's collapse blurred together, the air in Port Charles grew heavy with anticipation and dread, because everyone could feel that the truth was inching closer to full exposure, and with each passing hour the pressure intensified, especially inside General Hospital where Willow remained under observation, her physical strength returning far faster than her emotional resolve, since every time she closed her eyes she saw the courtroom again, the judge's gavel frozen midair, Danny's trembling voice slicing through the silence, and a crushing moment when the secret she had guarded with her life finally escaped into the open. Michael rarely left her side, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, holding her hand whenever nightmares jolted her awake, silently promising that she would never face the consequences alone again, while outside her room Carly stood watch like a sentry, daring anyone who had ever hurt Willow to come too close. Yet even Carly, fierce as she was, sensed something darker circling, because whispers of the hidden child in Jason's past had already reached the wrong ears, drawing dangerous figures out of the shadows. Meanwhile, Danny became the reluctant center of attention, questioned by detectives, protected by Jason, and watched closely by people who now realized how much power a teenager armed with the truth could wield, and though he tried to remain brave, the weight of what he had started pressed on him constantly, especially when anonymous threats began appearing, subtle at first, a warning glance here, a cryptic message there, clear signals that someone was desperate to keep the rest of the story buried. Back at the courthouse, legal maneuvering intensified as the prosecution scrambled to salvage its case, but the foundation had already crumbled, because evidence once thought damning now looked suspiciously manufactured, suggesting a coordinated effort to frame Willow, and when internal affairs quietly began investigating who had tampered with statements and timelines, panic spread among those who had assumed their secrets were untouchable. Nina, unraveling under the strain of guilt and fear, attempted once more to see Willow, this time bringing documentation she claimed proved she had tried to protect her, but the papers only highlighted how deeply Nina had involved herself in controlling Willow's life, and when Willow finally agreed to see her, the confrontation was raw and devastating, with Willow calmly but firmly stating that love built on manipulation was not love at all, leaving Nina shattered and forced to confront the reality that her obsession had cost her everything she claimed to want. As that door closed, Willow felt a strange sense of liberation for the first time in years, because speaking the truth, even partially, had stripped fear of some of its power. Across town, Jason made a quiet but resolute decision, mobilizing old allies to ensure that the child at the center of the storm remained protected, knowing full well that once names were officially spoken, enemies would circle like vultures, and he blamed himself for underestimating how far certain people would go to maintain control. That fear was justified when a late-night break-in at a storage facility tied to the case revealed that someone was actively destroying evidence, confirming that the threat was no longer theoretical, it was immediate. Willow sensed the shift too, her instincts sharpening as she realized that telling the full truth could endanger more than just reputations, yet the thought of returning to silence made her physically ill, and with quiet determination she asked to meet with investigators, ready to lay everything bare despite the risks. Michael supported her without hesitation, even as Carly warned them both that once certain lines were crossed, there would be no turning back, but Willow only nodded, because she had already lived on the edge of fear for too long. As Danny overheard adults discussing protective measures, guilt gnawed at him again, until Willow asked to see him privately, thanking him with tears in her eyes for saving her life, reminding him that courage didn't mean the absence of fear, but choosing truth anyway, and that moment solidified Danny's resolve, because he finally understood that what he had done mattered. As law enforcement pieced together the conspiracy, a familiar name resurfaced, someone long considered an ally, sending shockwaves through the investigation and confirming Willow's worst fear that betrayal had come from within her own circle, and when Michael learned who it was, the betrayal cut deeply, igniting a fury that bordered on reckless. Tension exploded when a shadowy figure was spotted near the hospital late one night, prompting Jason to increase security, and as Willow watched armed guards take positions outside her door, she realized that the lie she once believed was protecting everyone had actually made her more vulnerable. In quiet moments, Willow reflected on the child she had protected with her silence, wondering if one day that child would understand the sacrifices made in their name, and whether the truth would ultimately set them free or bind them to a legacy of violence and secrecy they never asked for. As the investigation accelerated, sealed documents were unsealed, financial trails exposed, and the narrative shifted from Willow as a suspect to Willow as a victim, but vindication offered little comfort when the danger continued to escalate. Michael and Willow shared a quiet, fragile moment of hope, speaking softly about a future that didn't revolve around fear or secrets, even as both knew that the storm had not yet passed. And as Port Charles braced for the next bombshell, one that would finally reveal the child's identity and expose the mastermind behind the blackmail, an undeniable truth settled over everyone involved. Willow's fainting spell in that courtroom had been the moment the lie collapsed, but the fallout was still unfolding, and the cost of the truth, once fully paid, would change lives forever, because in Port Charles, redemption is never simple, justice is never clean, and the truth always demands a sacrifice.